Part 1. The Challenge. So, as I mentioned previously in another video, I have plans to actually go and do reclamation algorithm, the regular version, no thing with critical contention, with a newbie account. Now, the goal is going to be fairly simple. All I want to do is get to Act 3 and complete it. Basically, it requires you to go throughout the entire map and defeat a bunch of virus raids. The rules for this particular challenge, which by the way is also going to serve as a bit of a guide, though this video in particular is not necessarily going to be one, but here it is as follows. Only 4 stars and lower rarity operators will be allowed along with welfare operators, specifically in combat and in reclamation algorithm. I have grinded a bit of this account with the use of support units, but in reclamation algorithm I will have no such luxury. The entire point of this is to use operators that everyone has access to. So 4 stars and lower, very easy to get. Welfare operators, everyone has access to them, by virtue of them being welfare. Second rule, the gacha operators are fine to use for expeditions and logistics. So expeditions are basically just nodes where you can decide to send your operators on a vacation to bring back a bunch of resources in exchange usually for energy drinks. In effect, it's not doing anything for combat, and yeah, it's not going to be very impactful. The second point is logistics. Logistics are a bunch of buffs that are available to everyone where you simply put your operators in a reserve and they give passive bonuses to whatever you do in combat in reclamation algorithm. It goes anywhere from extra DP at the start to additional attack speed or extra SP unemployment, additional damage versus wild beast, and the like. Now, as everyone knows, reclamation algorithm is a very wait, what is this? Arrays. Please no, array is really not for weak rosters. IS and SSS can be carried by 1 or 2 core units with some tactics, but not reclamation algorithm. Array. Worse than SSS. Array is truly a nightmare for you. Definition of endgame content. Yeah, IS and Array is a real endgame for AK. Array is sufficiently brutal for a new account. The only reason I can play Array is because I have a lot of E2 laying around. I also feel like I have way too much knowledge I need to know to actually play reclamation algorithm. Well, talk about being pessimistic. Alright. So, what's the big deal with reclamation algorithm? It's a game mode that, by virtue of the fact that it requires you to sacrifice a bunch of operators, both for logistics and expeditions, as mentioned previously, also usually requires you to have up to 24 fielded operators in a single day. So if you were to add up everything, you'd end up requiring well over 40 build operators just to do everything in a single day, basically. So no wonder it usually doesn't get recommended too much. Now, if this was the only thing, it would be fine, but there is the other aspect, which, fairly obviously, raids. Raids come with a lot of enemies, but they also come with various bosses, which, as can be seen with the stat line, are slightly above what you usually find in terms of average boss, let's just say. Seeing as said bosses have usually 10 times the HP of regular bosses, yeah, it's going to be quite a challenge. Talking about foes, let's get into this. These are the enemies that we'll have to deal with for the most part. See, the big issue with reclamation algorithm is that while the game mode itself may last indefinitely, you are a bit on a timer here. At day 25, 60 and 100, 3 different raids will visit you, and not with the best of intentions in mind, as they just want to absolutely raise your HQ to the ground. As such, it is best that you try to progress through the story as fast as possible. That way you may get the tools necessary to deal with each and every single raid. So That means that I can't just sit around and do nothing and wait for the raids. I actually have to progress through the story, get the necessary tools, build my defenses, and hopefully I'll get some provisions and walls and others that will allow me to defeat the raids. For a well-built account with countless E2s, this is not too much of a problem, and you can deal with very minimum strategy involved. Usually, you don't have to think about it too much. I will spare you the mouth, but in theory, I have all the tools needed to deal with those particular raids. They are extremely intimidating, but if you actually know the bosses and the composition of the raids themselves, you actually have ways to approach them. Of course, we'll see which during the actual run. Now, it's not the only thing that you have to deal with in Array. You also have a few bosses that are notorious for being pretty brutal DPS tests. So you have the the Croc Priestess, notorious for, well, simply requiring someone to finish her off in a 1v1, since everyone else will deal exactly 0 damage after a while. I think it's below 50% HP if I'm correct. So basically you need to find operators that will be able to duel her and all on their own. You can provide various support, so SP batteries if you do have them, provisions, buffers, which I'm not aware of any welfare operators that can very significantly buff my operators, so that's definitely going to be interesting, as well as a Time String Guardian. Time String Guardian is a chunky boy who is going to make all your damage dealer that are not arts completely irrelevant. So yeah, that's another fancy one, especially considering you can keep stunning your operators and hurts pretty bad. There are also a few that I didn't mention, but since they tend to be much later into the run, I simply didn't put them here because later down the run you usually have access to more tools, more provisions, and more time to actually approach the different enemies. So that's much less of a concern. Part 2. The preparations. So for this particular challenge, I've settled on quite a few operators that will be definitely core to the general approach of various stages and raids in order to win the DPS test and just survive overall. It's not going to be an exhaustive list, as there will be a few additional 4 stars are not listed there, simply because I don't consider them to be core to the strats, or it is perhaps that, well, it's not that they are particularly bad or anything. In fact, some of them will be important, like Gravel, for example, is not going to get a mention for the strat themselves, but Gravel is someone who is particularly useful when it comes to the exploration part of Reclamation and Govern. The particular focus here is going to be all about, again, the DPS test that you have to go through, as well as the raids. So we are going to start with Amia. Everyone has access to Amia, so this is going to be a pretty easy one. Standard Artscaster. Her S3 actually doesn't have that high of a DPS, but it is 2 damage, and considering the lack of access that we have when it comes to debuffs, in particular res down, it is going to be very useful. One example would be Arafik. Well, Arafik is nowhere near as much of a problem in regular Array compared to a certain game mode with infinitely scaling stats. It's still significant that you have to deal with this particular DPS test with very limited resources, mostly very limited set of operators. The second one is going to assist again in that regard, and it's going to be Kira. Now, if you've taken a look at my extremely unpopular video that lasts over 2 hours about Mecha Cook casters, you will know that Kira, very interestingly enough, is actually one of the better 5-star Mecha Cook casters, being the second highest DPS right behind Rock, but like Rock is in a different league, and an obvious issue, Rock is not a welfare operator. She's a gacha operator, so not an option. The other interesting point is that our skill 2 has a chance to freeze the enemies. Now, usually it's not a particularly great skill, simply by virtue of the fact that the uptime on the golden freeze is just not particularly great. One interesting factor about Array is that due to the logistic buffs that you have access to, you can actually, even with a very minor increase in attack speed, result in very significant differences in terms of performance for the skill. As little as 5 attack speed is enough to more than double sometimes the time of freeze on the targets. So she becomes a much more reliable crowd control on top of being a unit that can in fact debuff the enemy's resistance, since frozen enemies will have a minus 15 res for the duration of the debuff. Next up, we have Crusader, who is going to be also a very potent physical damage dealer, but this time for physical damage. Crusader is very similar to Exu, except that she's a 5-star variant. Her damage potential is not quite as high, and she suffers from the same weakness that her damage per hit is fairly low. The reason for Crusader is twofold. The first one is to actually cut trees early on, since those have very low defense, and also to deal with the Sail Raider much later down the line. The Sail Raider has a very impressive 500,000 plus HP, but only 150 defense. So she's going to be a prime target to actually deal with said Sail Raider. Possibly I might need Contrail at some point to block the boss. I'm not entirely sure about this part, so we'll see. Next on the line is our favorite turtle, Quora. Quora is she has a lot of defense. See, a lot of enemies are pretty aggressive and can get pretty brutal for operators that are unprepared. It turns out that someone like the Dauntless Linebreaker can reach 2200 attack on top of attacking very fast your operators. So Quora is actually the perfect fit. On her own, she can't quite get the uptime necessary on her S2 to stay alive. However, this is not particularly a concern. Passively, her stats and defense are extremely high, and on top of this, you can combine her stats, base stats, with provisions that are going to increase her defense even further to basically reduce all the damage from enemies to, well, basically the minimum 5% or close enough to it that even 3-star healers will be able to keep her alive. She is fairly simple, and ultimately she is also very replaceable. Technically, you cannot guarantee that you'll get Quora, since she drops from recruitment or also from, well, the gacha system. If you do not have Quora, worry not, for there are enough viable alternatives that you don't really have to worry about it. Bubble is another one, and any 5-star or 6-star defender with a focus on defense will be able to actually fill the same role. It's just that Quora, being a 4-star option, is fairly cheap to develop and does the job really well. Now, this is about it when it comes to the bosses and the DPS races. When it comes to the raids themselves, I have a few options that are in mind. The first one is probably not going to surprise a lot of people. It's Ethan. It's always Ethan. He's everywhere. Obviously, if you have too many enemies and if your damage is a bit too low, you can just decide to bind the raid for a very long period of time. And Ethan does just that. If it's not a problem and your kill speed is decently high, you can even use him on skill 1 to provide some additional odds damage. I don't think I'm gonna be using him on S1 all that much, for there are certainly going to be a few cases which are going to be of interest. But for the most part, yeah, it's fun. It's crowd control. You already know what its job is. Secondly, we have Asgeny. Asgeny? Probably Asgeny. Her role is just going to be to deal with the incoming enemies as they come, and deal a lot of damage so that they don't stack. And to supplement her, there is going to be where is Pudding? Hello? Oh, hey. Yeah. Okay, Pudding is a bit shy. Don't worry about this. Don't worry about this. Still, Pudding is filling the exact same role as Ginny, which is just to provide constant art DPS to the raids, seeing as those often have a lot of pretty high defense enemies, so it's going to be important to bring as much as you can. On top of this, and not mentioned, are going to be basically the entire crew of 3-star operators. So the like of Leva, Beagle, Hole, and a few others. Hibiscus and Ansel will be here on the party. Now, these are the operators that I identified as being necessary, but there might definitely be a few other options that are accessible to welfare that will be more than welcome. Honeyberry will be a very obvious one when it comes to general exploration, since she's basically the only option available, we are not counting Chestnut, to deal with elemental damage. Part 3. The Nostalgia. This has nothing to do with reclamation algorithm, it's just a way for me to say, gosh damn, it does feel pretty nice to go back through the ancient stages of old with a new account and just see a lot of progress, and actually also check out that you're not just getting carried by a bunch of operators that have overinflated stats. You actually have to think about it. Also, HD decided to introduce some tutorials not too long ago, and why do they have such an absolute banger soundtrack? Like, that's just a tutorial, like, seriously, just have a listen. Part 4. The Pose. Why do I have Narantuya on my alt account? I can't use her. I don't even have her on my main account. Why are you doing this to me? Like, I feel like she's just staring at me right into my soul, mockingly. Part 5. The Puzzle Incident. As a newer player, you get a bunch of tokens to unlock various side events. Side investment of tokens is quite important because it allows you to grab a bunch of the welfare operators. Here's the thing, I consider Puzzle because Puzzle is one of the best DP generators around. So naturally I did the same thing and went to What the Fighter Cast, which is the event where you're supposed to get Puzzle, and there is no recall restoration yet. As it turns out, this is the next recall restoration that we should be getting, but I guess I won't have a puzzle, so good luck managing DP. Yay! I guess I might as well also update the rules. So now we're going to add a small addendum to the rules. Yes, we're already changing those. That's a good start. I had it too easy, so I'm also going to forbid the welfares that don't have a recall restoration yet. See, I have a blessing on my account due to the Swilling Storm Himhurst event that I definitely did not butcher. And I'm just gonna put a rule that I can't use him. It's not too big of a deal because ultimately is not that potent and not part of any core strategy. But gosh damn, missing puzzle, it hurts. It hurts a lot. Also, why do I always keep making things harder for me? Do I really have parte sesta? Reclaiming the reclamation. Okay, what top whose titles? Gosh, it was Skull Shatterer, that is available on 3.8, is the final boss before you finally unlock Reclamation algorithm. So I did not try to clear the stage right away. I actually took a bit of a stroll around, decided to bully some dragon to first retrieve Crusader, and only after bullying said dragon did I go to actually fight Skull Shatterer. This was also in large part necessary because Amiya is required to get the finishing blow to unlock her module. So does Crusader. Like, Crusader also requires a finishing blow, but she wasn't E2 at the time. So yeah, this is just me clearing this fight with only Amiya as E2. Now, this is not where things just start for Reclamation algorithm, because I am not that suicidal. Septima parte. Finishing touch. Before going into array for real, I'll need a few E2 operators, more so than just Amiya herself. So I did a few things. First things first, you can just do the monthly squads in every IS. The squads is preset and the operators have built. It's an easy way to get a bunch of XP tickets, LMD, and then some extra class chips to get the E2 promotions. So that's a nice bonus. Next are the events. When I actually started the account, Stronghold Protocol was actually out there. As it turns out, I just decided to make things even harder for myself, for no good reason of course, by trying to clear all of it without using any operators, that is from, well, any operators that's a support operator as a matter of fact. It is in fact possible to clear core protocol, which is the hardest difficulty, using just a bunch of operators that are given to you for free. The usual strats were fairly boring because it was very RNG reliant, extremely limited in terms of options, because basically you always went for Mechanist as a way to tank the enemies, Piff to do damage, and then Touch to keep yourself alive. You didn't really have enough variation into it because freeze strats didn't work, fast redeploy strats also didn't work. Yeah, it's either Mechanist with a bunch of Defender collectibles or just Piff deviating everything, with usually a lot of stalling involved in the later stages. But hey, this is possible, and I can probably say, yeah, I've done it. I didn't need no friends because I don't have any, which is yeah, it's a very weird accomplishment to have, but we'll just skip on this. Apart from this, I obviously went through 4-4 to bully Crownslayer because it wouldn't be a full video if there wasn't some amount of Crownslayer bullying. And finally, some SSS. Yes, I know SSS is not something that a lot of people like, but for the people who just want to speed through it, you can do it even on a completely newbie account. The general idea is going to stay the same. You usually want to have 2 carry operators, Lapland Altar and Golden Glow. If you have one of them, just pick the other support unit. And yeah, you bring a bunch of stacks, a few Vanguards to keep your DP up, 1 or 2 medics, well, usually 2 medics or Guardian Defenders, sometimes that can also work, along with a bunch of supporters. The supporters are just there to cycles, and the units that you stack to get a bunch of attack speed and SP cost. Usually you want to use snipers and specialists, because snipers will give you 40 ASPD, while the specialist will give you 20 ASPD and some SP recovery. You don't care about attack too much because both Golden Glow and Lapland Altar already have their own attack. So once you've done this, you can activate their thing. Let's be honest, it wasn't the most interesting thing, but it's just a way to say, hey, even if you're a newer player, you can do it. That's not too difficult. There is going to be some reliance on RNG, obviously, but at least it's doable. So, after 2 weeks, this is where the account is currently sitting at. So level 49, quite respectable. To go over some of the things I've not mentioned previously, I do not hesitate not to spend money, but at the very least to use Originum Prime if I need to farm some things a lot. Some stages have to be farmed manually using logos, for example, or in this particular case, either Mudrock or Penance. And another thing to cover, which is definitely going to be critical, is the base. Now, when it comes to the base, luckily I do have a few advantages when it comes to just general knowledge of what are the best ways to maximize productivity. If you're already aware of how base functions, this is a 252. 252 for 2 trading posts, 5 factories, and 2 power plants. This is the best way to get some very high productivity very early on, because compared to 243, for example, you have an entire factory which is an additional. You can think of each factory as having by default 100% productivity. So having one extra one is a very significant boost. It also has a few other advantages, which is that the base itself, especially near the right and when it comes to the dorms, will require a lot less minerals. It does come at a bit of a sacrifice because ultimately you can see that the office is only level 1, which means I have only 2 recruitment slots and the reception room is only level 2, but I'm only losing on like 5% clue search. Thanks to all this being combined, you can see that even after 2 weeks, you can already get around 40,000 LMD produced along with some very decent EXP. When it comes to the roster itself, I have decided to level every usable operator to level 2. So this is what we are working with right now. Reclamation algorithm itself does drop some additional rewards and it will take time to complete, so I do intend to introduce some of the operators. Podding, especially specifically for raids, Ethan as well. Honeyberry will probably join the party at some point. But yeah, we have most of what we need. In theory, at least. We'll see in practice what happens. Yeto will also see some use as a fast-ish redeploy with 2 block, and Warcall since he's just so cheap. So it can be used to gather some resources. Along with the rest, all the 4 stars are options. We also have a side rocker, because I'm really bad at spending those weekly tokens. And if we go to the right, these are all the operators at level 1 who aren't allowed. So yeah, I can just stare at them. They are going to be mostly used for base and expeditions and logistics, because they are not allowed in actual combat. Texas, technically you could be like, is she considered welfare? Because every player can actually gather for free through the missions. But seeing as all our potentials are locked behind Gacha, I just decided to say, nah, just might as well use someone else. It's not particularly critical to use her anyway. We have Kestrel and Courier and a few others. So, with a base and production set up, reclamation algorithm itself giving a bunch of rewards, there is only one thing left to do, which is to start. See you in another video.